Okay, you are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM or on our website, our new website, www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. Today on the program, we'll be continuing our City Council preview with Councilmember Jamie Gaudier, and Johan Calhoun of Chalkbeat will join us to discuss their work on how gun violence is impacting Philadelphia students. And I am joined, as always, by Denise Clay Murray. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. My son had a cold.
Oh,
He coughed in my face about 90 times over the weekend. Now I have the cold and I think, a more severe form of it. But I'm gonna carry on tonight.
well,
So,
that the show must go on, and at least we can hear you because when I get a cold, I lose my voice. So you're doing okay.
oh, the voice was gone for a while,
Oh,
but
okay.
Mucinex and Dayquil helped. So, we would just like to take a minute at the top of the show to let everybody know
Mhm.
we have, I guess, what you would call version 2.0 of our newsletter
Right.
that just went out yesterday. It'll go out
Mhm.
twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. And we have version 2.0 of our website, www.hallmonitor.org, which you should check out. Our work is there. We're going to have some articles up. We have a city council preview that's up right now, and there will be much more to come in the coming weeks. But before we get to that, speaking of city council previews, here is our interview with Councilmember Jamie Gaudier. Right, Councilmember, thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
So, City Council's fall session begins this week. What are some of your top priorities going into the fall?
Sure. I'm going to continue to go deeper on the subject areas that I've already been working on and came to council to work on. For one, I'll continue to work on the issue of affordable housing. We are currently experiencing a housing crisis in West and Southwest Philadelphia and across the city. This year, in particular, I'm going to be focused on the preservation of affordable housing. Many people are aware of, because it's been in the news, what's going on at the University City Townhome site, for example, where you have a low-income housing development that was supported by a federal subsidy that's now expired. And so once the subsidy expires, whomever owns the property has the option of keeping that property in service as affordable housing or selling that property, which can lead to displacement of many people. And so that's what's going on at 40th and Market. But the townhome site is just one example of literally thousands of units across the city that will have their subsidies expire over the next 5 to 10 years, and there's really no plan for that. And so I want to do what I can at the local level to ensure that people are protected and to ensure that we're not losing, affordable housing and displacing people, particularly low-income people, particularly Black and Brown people from our neighborhoods. So we're looking into various solutions that came from a hearing we did last year on the same topic. Some of the things that we're exploring are expanding the notice period by which an owner has to, give notice to folks that they don't intend to renew their subsidies, requiring a right of first offer, or requiring a right of first refusal, either to the city or to qualified entities that do want to buy, these affordable housing projects and keep them in service as affordable housing, or implementing a tenant right to purchase, which has happened in other places. So this will be a huge priority for me this session and in this year. And not only am I going to be plugging away at this on the local level, I'll also be looking for partnership and support from the state and federal levels of government. The program that we have now that subsidizes affordable housing, whether it be through HAP contracts or through low-income housing tax credits, there are these programs are in place because of partnerships at all levels of government. And we need that same level of partnership and participation to save these units. Another area that I'll be continuing to work on diligently is gun violence. In the past, I've been very vocal about the need for the city to have a more urgent and more comprehensive strategy. I pushed the mayor to declare a citywide emergency around the issue of gun violence. I fought with my colleagues for record level funding for violence prevention and intervention initiatives. This session, I think I want to focus more in on how we reach youth and how we do more to calm conflicts that are arising because of street group violence. On Friday, all of us were heartbroken because Tiffany Fletcher, a Parks and Rec employee working at the Mill Creek Rec Center, which is in my district, was caught in the crossfire among two groups of youth, two groups of very young teens who had guns and were shooting at one another. And she got caught in the crossfire and she unfortunately died because of those injuries. And so, I've been watching the violence that has been happening in my district and across the city. And a lot of it are these, conflicts that are arising between different youth tied to various blocks or streets or areas of West and Southwest Philly who are feuding with one another. And I think that, if the city wants to get a handle on gun violence, we have to understand what's going on with young people. Why are these conflicts coming about? Who can we find within neighborhoods to talk to our young people and maybe calm down these conflicts? And I also think that we need to do more to get guns off of the street and out of the hands of young people. So those are the two areas specifically with regards to gun violence that I see myself focusing on this session. And then I would say city services. One thing that has become very apparent to me in my time as a council member is that every neighborhood in Philadelphia is not served equitably as it relates to city services. And so I'm talking about everything from, trash not being picked up on time in certain neighborhoods to abandoned cars being left on the streets in parts of West and Southwest, to, illegal dumping that happens repeatedly and there's no real proactive strategy for it. Street lights being out in neighborhoods where you are having issues with gun violence or carjackings, and also, the city being unable to really deal with nuisance and blighted properties that are leading to gun violence and illicit drug activity within our neighborhoods. I was able to work with our city controller last year to pull data on 311 service calls. And what we found were in the neighborhoods where gun violence is highest, we're getting the most 311 service calls for these types of issues. If you overlay those service calls on a map, it's almost the same map as where gun violence is happening over and over and over again. And so I think if the city was better at delivering basic city services. And if the city did that in a more equitable way, it would not only show our residents that we care about them and that we care about the places where they live, it could also make our neighborhoods a lot safer. And so those are the things that I think will define my work. And those are all areas that I've worked on in the past. And I'll add one new area. Life sciences, and making sure that the city has a robust workforce development strategy to put our residents to work in all of this new lab space and manufacturing space that's being built, particularly in the third district. We're seeing that much of the development that's happening in West and Southwest Philadelphia is being driven by the growth of life sciences companies. And we want to make sure that, in particular, Black and Brown residents of the third district are able to get connected to those jobs. Those are jobs where, you don't necessarily have to have a degree, but if you have specialized training, you can earn a family sustaining wage, right? And so as these facilities are being built, I don't just want our folks being in the security guard jobs or the janitorial jobs, which is and those jobs are very admirable, but our folks also deserve to be in those labs, right? And to participate in this new economy that is starting in the third district. And so those are the things that will define my agenda this session, but probably over the next year and probably the next few years, because those are big things.
Yeah, sure. Can you tell us a little bit about the revenue workshops your office has been hosting?
Oh, sure. So we have our first revenue workshop this evening at Transfiguration Church, but it's a part of a series of workshops that we're doing to make sure that people understand all the changes that have happened with their assessments, that they understand what programs are available to them to, alleviate relieve some of the tax burden, and that they understand the appeals process as well. I know many people were shocked when they received their new assessments, and this is our way of helping residents to really deal with that.
Okay. One of the key drivers of violence in the city is poverty. Mm-hmm. So you had mentioned a few things that are going to help alleviate poverty. Do you see council in general taking steps this fall that would work to break the 26% poverty rate?
Sure. And I haven't kind of touched base with every council member to know exactly what it is that they're working on, but this, the reduction of poverty is an area that council has been focused on for the past several years. So I do see us continuing to work in that area, whether it be making sure that youth have connections to jobs, or making sure that people have housing opportunity, making sure that people have the ability to advance economically. I see that as an area that council will continue to work in.
Okay, I'd like to bring in Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Homeline.
Thank you for joining us, council member. I really appreciate it.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Now, you mentioned the city's gun violence issue, and also the possibility of a citywide state of emergency. One of the things that a lot of us asked is, what would that mean? What would that look like? And is that still on the table?
For me, the state of emergency or having an emergency declared was never about, for example, a particular resource that opens. It was more so about the city creating a platform to bring all of its resources to this effort every single day. And I tried to outline that for the mayor. So if we were approaching this as an emergency, for example, I think that all of the city's operating agencies would be meeting, on a probably a daily basis to look at what neighborhoods are most suffering from gun violence right now, and to decide how, you know, we as a collective devote resources to those people in our neighborhoods. That means that I'm not pushing streets to get street lights turned on in neighborhoods where there are rampant shootings. That means that we have an easier time working with L&I to shut down problem properties that are leading to shootings, because every agency would have at the top of its agenda gun violence. That's what I'm coming to work to focus on, to make sure that I'm using whatever resources, you know, I have as a commissioner or agency head to make sure that to help this problem. I think that if we, you know, we're addressing this as an emergency, you know, people wouldn't be in the dark or confused about what the city's strategy is. You know, when we were going through the COVID emergency, you saw the health commissioner on the TV every day, many times with the mayor, every day, talking about case counts, talking about what the city was doing to make the situation better, and talking to people about how they can protect themselves. If we were truly treating this as an emergency, I think we would be mobilizing, you know, not only the resources of the city, but, you know, the private sector, our business community, our institutions, to have them at the table directing resources towards the neighborhoods that are struggling right now. And we will also have better relationships with our community partners on the ground. And so I'm not saying that we're not doing anything. There are many people that are working very hard on this issue. But if the question to me is, do I think that, you know, every city agency is coming to the table every day to talk about how we should problem solve on this issue in concert with the community? And if the question is whether residents and neighborhoods have a good understanding of the city's strategy and how they should plug into it, my answer to that would be no. So
Okay.
I am, you know, I use the language of an emergency to push the city towards making sure that this issue that's taking the lives, particularly of Black and Brown young people on a daily basis, is top of mind for everyone who's sort of working here.
Okay. Now you also mentioned the University City Homes. First of all, what is the status of those residents? Have they been moved out? Where did they go? Was there any place for them to go? And also, with affordable housing, you know, there comes like federal money, like Section 8 vouchers and different things. Has there been any move to try to get the federal government involved to deal with this issue?
Sure, and I have to be very careful about what I say here. The city of Philadelphia is currently being sued by the owner of the University City Townhomes around legislation that I pushed through council, which protects affordable housing in the area where the townhome sits. And so they filed a suit back in March of 2022 against the city of Philadelphia, against myself as a council member, and against me as an individual in federal court. And we're currently still fighting that lawsuit.
So, because there seems to be a lot of this going on, particularly in your district.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a district that's already had its share of gentrification issues, particularly around the University of Penn area. I guess, how are people tackling this? What are you hearing from your constituents about all of this change, and particularly about the fact that it feels to many folks that we've talked to like they're being consciously displaced?
I mean, I definitely think this is one of the biggest issues beyond gun violence that the city has to contend with right now. How we have equitable neighborhoods, and how the opportunity that is, you know, coming to the city and existing in the city is for everyone, right? Particularly the Black and Brown folks that have been here holding down our neighborhoods. It's certainly been my core issue. That's why I did the legislation, you know, that I'm currently being sued for in the area that includes the townhomes. That's why I passed a law last year called the Mixed Income Neighborhoods Overlay that requires that at least 20% of housing units in any development that's 10 units or more, whether it's home ownership or rental, be affordable. And so that is a law that passed last year that the city began implementing in July, and I hope that it will generate a lot more affordability in new development. That's why I've been so focused on pushing the city to use publicly owned land expressly for the purpose of affordable housing. So I think residents rightly feel that housing is moving beyond their reach. But certainly, as a council member, this has been the issue, that I've focused on most beyond gun violence, because I know it's top of mind for my constituents.
Okay, now I have one last question. You're going into a council session on Thursday where you're going to only have 13 people, including yourself. And that means that, there's probably going to be a little bit of upheaval because of that, because folks, everything the council does is set for 17 people. Talk a little bit about, how you think this council session is going to work, especially since, there's only 13 of you, which means if you need 9 votes to pass something and 12 to override it, if the mayor vetoes it, you have no margin for error.
Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of guidance on that. You guys will have to interview Darrell Clark to really get a better. I'm not sitting with a lot of guidance on how things will operate. I think the council president is working with, law and other entities to define that.
Okay, well, thank you. And we'll go back to Larry McGlynn, and you're still listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM.
Thank you, Denise. Councilmember, I just have 2 quick questions for you here. What should the city do with its budget surplus?
I think, the city should be all in on affordable housing and making sure that everyone has a home. And the city should be all in on stopping gun violence, whether that be, supporting community groups that are doing great violence prevention work, or finding a way to connect young people in the path of violence to meaningful income opportunities, whatever it may be, to the extent, we have to make sure that our neighborhoods are safe in order to thrive as a city. So those would be my 2 top priorities. And I think that, we should not be shy about spending on those priorities. They're very important.
And whether we like it or not, we are in the midst of the 2023 mayoral election here in Philadelphia. What qualities are you looking for in a new mayor?
I'm looking for someone that is passionate and has a bold vision for moving us out of what feels like a very dark time right now, and who can wrap their arms around communities and people in our communities and give them the level of support they need right now, whether that be around, supporting communities through the gun violence epidemic, or making sure that everyone has adequate housing opportunities, making sure that, young people have safe, productive things to do, so that we're not in this dynamic where libraries aren't open enough and rec centers aren't open enough, making sure that our school facilities are safe. I feel like, we've gone through an incredibly tough 3 years, and you can feel that in the city. It's visceral. And so, we need someone who can stand with residents and show a level of empathy for what folks are going through right now, but also offer a vision for getting us, that everybody participates in, for getting us to a different place. That's what I'm excited about in terms of, hearing folks' ideas and visions in this primary.
All right, Councilmember Jamie Gaudier, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, we would like to thank Councilmember Jamie Gaudier for joining us on Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. So Denise, council starts tomorrow for the fall session. One of the, I think, two reoccurring themes we've heard over and over again are an emphasis on anti-violence programming and housing. We're looking at a council that's going to be smaller than what we're used to.
Yes. Could
be smaller by the time we're speaking next week or the week after. How effective? What's that?
Unfortunately, you're absolutely right about that.
So how effective can council be in this fall session to make immediate gains?
Well, it depends on what gets passed and what Mayor Kenny decides to sign into law. Because the way the council is set up, it's 17 people. In order to get a bill passed, you need 9 folks. In order to get that bill overridden, you need 12, which means since now there's only 13 people on council, there's no margin for error. So whatever comes into council chambers and gets passed is going to have to be darn near, a unanimous thing. Everybody's going to have to be on the same page. But that said, there's opportunities for folks to still be effective. It's just going to require a little bit more of an ability to compromise on everybody's part.
Do you think there's a possibility with fewer voices on council and fewer people with whom you have to negotiate, that there's maybe a stronger possibility that some legislation that maybe in years past wouldn't necessarily make it through might have a better chance now?
Well, it depends on who introduces it and what the legislation is. For all intents and purposes, you have kind of a more progressive council now, because a lot of the more moderate people have resigned and run for mayor, which leaves, your more progressive group there to have more of an influence on policy. Now that means that in some cases you have more of a chance for a mayoral veto on certain things, which means you've got to make sure you can get that group of 12 people to override that veto, which may be harder still because we have not seen the last of the resignations from the resign to run crew that's eventually going to run for mayor. We haven't seen the last of those yet. We haven't even seen the last of those when it comes to council. So again, it's all kind of up in the air. And what's weird about it is that on the one hand, everybody's like kind of excited because, mayoral candidates and all of that. But on the other hand, you kind of have to wonder, was this the best time for you all to leave? I understand that raising money is something that's going to require a lot of time. And it really kind of helps if you're not doing your full-time job on city council while you're trying to raise money to run for mayor. But it's also a distraction in a lot of ways. The Inquirer had an article in it last weekend that was talking about the fact that because of these resignations, you have a special election is going to be taking place at the same time that the midterm elections for governor and senator are going to be taking place. Now, on one hand, having a special election during the midterms is a good thing because maybe more people will come out and vote in the special election because you have more people, there's more of an interest. There's a local interest in addition to, like a hyper local interest in addition to the regular local interest. So that might be a good idea. But on the other hand, the mail-in ballots that people or that choose to vote by mail are going to be using to do that, it's going to take a little longer for them to get printed because while everybody was ready for them to be printed with just the gubernatorial and Senate and legislative elections, you now have this new election on top of it. You now have this special election to contend with. So it's going to be interesting to see whether or not people can get these mail-in ballots printed out on time so that they can have the special election and not have it impact how the statewide elections go. Because Philadelphia is the largest city in the state of Pennsylvania. And as Philly goes, kind of so goes the rest of the state when it comes to stuff like this.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, we had, for the most part, asked every council member very similar questions, with the idea being we wanted to gauge everybody's thoughts on a couple of key things. And one of the things that we asked, and I didn't expect the answers, I was looking at it in a different way, is what do you think the mood of council will be in the fall regarding poverty specifically, but also the things that come with it? And almost to a person, the answer we received is, I'm not exactly sure what my colleagues are going to be doing. Did that surprise you? Or is that something that's sort of par for the course in your experience?
Well, actually, I wasn't that surprised by that because unlike councils past, this council, you couldn't see them all at a party together. You could see certain sections of them at a party together, but you couldn't see them all at a party. And not everybody thinks about things the exact same way to where they talk to each other all that much about what their thought processes are. So no, that didn't surprise me a whole lot, but you would think that there would be some sort of cohesion that's going on with this. Poverty and gun violence are very important topics, and you would hope that folks would get on the same page.
Particularly now, right? In light of a couple of things. The fact that we're looking at a smaller council, we're looking at this terrible violence almost increasing, right? And the fact that the city's going to have a over $400 million in budget surplus money that they can use. And now going back, when I first started reporting on city council, I had meetings with various council members that were just conversations about like, how does this work? And I remember asking a council member who's not there anymore about the budget. And I said, these budget books are, 2 or 3 feet tall each, and there's 2 or 3 of them. Do you talk to other council members and say, well, I'll take this part and you take this part? And he said, no. We all just kind of do our own thing with it. And I was a little surprised by that because when we're talking about something as large as the budget, you would think that you would have a concerted plan to look at it. And same thing when we're talking about these massive problems we're having. My belief is that a lot of the violence issues we're having would not all be eliminated, but would certainly be reduced if we had targeted anti-poverty programming in place. And that's the thing where I thought, ooh, they have a lot of money now that they weren't expecting to have. And they have an entire council session to use those funds to work on some different ideas and different programming. But it doesn't seem like that's necessarily going to be coming out of the gate tomorrow. I would expect to see some things happen, maybe a little later in the session, October, you might start to see maybe a transfer ordinance, something like that. But it to me, it didn't sound like anybody had any legislation like ready to go.
No.
And do you think we're looking at a situation where that'll come in time, or maybe it's just we're looking to move some of that money to existing programs? Do you have any feel for that right now?
I think that right now it would probably be easier for them to just move the stuff move any cash to existing programs, because no one wants. I mean, City Hall isn't as bad as Congress in this regard.
That's right.
But one of the main things that I do remember from my political science classes is that the main thing that politicians want to do with their time in office is ensure they get another term. And right now, with 2023 on the horizon, you will if there's anything new that council wants to do in terms of poverty, in terms of gun violence, in terms of any number of things, it will probably happen as we get closer to the 2023 elections, because you want to justify your existence. You want to justify your continued existence as a council person, if that's where you want to be. Or if you're one of the people who hasn't resigned yet and wants to run for mayor, you want to have something fresh to present to people, to say, hey, look, you should make me mayor based on the fact that before I left council, I did this, or I did that, or I added to this other thing. What I will never understand for the life of me is the fact that the federal government gave you a whole bunch of money thanks to your hardships from COVID and different things, and for some reason you've chosen to hang on to it like it's your money. It's not your money. It's not the federal government's money. It's the people's money. And the reason why that money was sent to you was so that you could do stuff for, I don't know, the people. What are you doing with, why are you sitting on billions of dollars, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania? And why are you sitting on millions of dollars, City of Philadelphia, poorest big city in America, a place where we could really use the money? Why are you sitting on this? And no one can give you a straight answer, no matter how hard you try. And it's really, really frustrating at times. But
right. Go ahead,
but you're hoping that council at least addresses some of this, because eventually, because believe me, that's going to get asked on the campaign trail, and you may as well try to have a much better answer than for that question.
Yeah. The city, we've asked repeatedly about the COVID money, and what we've been told is, they want to keep it on the back end because they're worried about deficits a couple of years down the line. And the question we've been asking is, well, there are a lot of issues right now. Maybe now would be the time to spend some of that money. And out of 1.4 billion, in the first year, I think they only spent $250 million of it.
That's not even $500 million.
And that's less than they said they were going to spend. And, at the state level, well, that we can't even, they're not even telling you anything like that. They're just saying, yeah, we have this money. So what?
And it's a rather large pile on the state level that
Could
they're
be as much as
just not spending.
$10 billion,
Right. Do you
which,
know what you could do to end poverty with $10 billion?
yeah,
You could end poverty statewide.
you,
Everybody
you
would be good.
so the capital expenditures for the school district, I believe, are in excess of $4 billion to take care of all the outstanding issues, all,
Mhm.
buildings and everything like that. There you go. There's one use that would have a huge impact,
Mhm.
not just in the city, but in the state, right?
Right.
Because if you're going to fix up those schools, that's construction jobs. Um, it's long-term investment. It's students doing better in school because they have better facilities. That'll never happen because there is an anti-Philadelphia animus in Harrisburg. But even if they said, we'll give you $1 billion for that, it would have a huge impact. It would make a major difference in a lot of kids' lives.
Yeah, because when you have to start the school year off by kids having to take time off because the schools are literally too hot for them to learn in, this could go a long way. Now, once
Every
upon a
year.
time, once upon a time, when the Commonwealth was run by people who actually thought that doing stuff like this makes sense, they had something called Plan Con. It was a system under which school districts could go to the state and say, look, we either need a new school or we need to make repairs to some of our old schools, but we don't have that kind of money. Can you help us out? Under Plan Con, the Commonwealth would pick up a significant percentage of the money to fix a school up and would pick up almost all of the costs to rebuild a new one. For reasons that no one can figure out and that make no sense to anyone who is in a school district and looks at the buildings in the schools every day and sees what the needs are, that plan was done away with. And because of that, a lot of places like Philadelphia, who have schools that are so old that your grandmother went here and
Yeah.
she's in her 80s, they weren't able to do what they needed to do to get them fixed. Now, there's been talk about bringing Plan Con back. Now would be the time when you're sitting on $10 billion, the three or $400,000 that a district might need to fix up and or rebuild schools in its district would be nothing to you.
And, just statewide, Philadelphia contributes much more to the Commonwealth
Mhm.
than it gets back.
Yeah.
And this would be the perfect opportunity to correct some of that, to make sure Philadelphia gets something so they can so we can continue being the economic engine for the rest of the state.
Or what I like to refer to us as the state's ATM.
Yeah, that's exactly
Because
right.
let's face it, and this is why if I ever move back to Philadelphia and I decide I'm going to go into politics, this is why I will never be elected mayor of Philadelphia. Because my very first press conference, what in the world's going on? For my very, very first press conference would get me arrested. Because that would be the press conference in which I announce we are not paying any more state taxes. And we are keeping our money. We're going to rebuild our schools. We're going to fix our roads. We're going to start anti poverty programs to help our people in poverty. We're going to put together safe homeless shelters for people who are unhoused so that they can get the help they need to, have the dignity that they need to work for themselves, or if they have mental health issues, get those health issues straightened out. We're going to keep our money. You guys do what you need to do on what you get from Pittsburgh and the farm show, and we will talk to you later. Now, if I did that, the state police would probably storm into City Hall and cart me away. But I think that if someone who is a politician, unlike myself, decided that they were going to run for mayor and that they would campaign on the basis of the city finally being shown the respect it deserves from the rest of the Commonwealth, a lot of people would vote for that person. And I really think that Hall Monitor listeners and viewers might want to consider asking the mayoral candidates that will be showing up at your churches and your events and stuff for the rest of the year. What are you going to do about this?
And it looks like our next guest is here.
Yay!
So we would like to welcome Johan Calhoun of Chalk Beat, Philadelphia, and I'll turn this over to Denise Clay Murray.
Hey, Johan, how are you?
I'm good. About yourself, Denise?
Not bad, not bad. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
What we wanted to bring you on about is because you're doing a series on gun violence and children in the school district of Philadelphia, and it's been crazy over the summer, and some of the craziness has continued now as folks at recreational centers, or children who go to recreational centers, are watching as the people that work with them are meeting with harm. Some of the children themselves are meeting with harm because we have this issue of gun violence. What made you decide to start this series, and how did you connect with the people you connected with for it?
Mm-hmm. Well, gun violence, as you know, Denise, is at a crazy level in Philadelphia right now. As of today, about 384 homicides have been recorded this year, which is a 4% increase from last year. And most of that number, of course, includes gun deaths. So we're looking at, when we published the story, we had about 176 teenagers to have died as a result of gun violence. And with that number, we were looking at about 85% of that number were Black teenagers. Schools are still kind of reeling from the pandemic, and they are kind of left grappling with the trauma and anxiety of these killings. So to document how gun violence is affecting students' academic performance and schools' ability to fulfill their mission, we decided to, I pitched that Chalk Beat were to take on this issue of gun violence and how it's affecting students. And we decided to shed some light on district schools affected the most by the city's gun violence, including the Juvenile Justice Center in West Philadelphia, and what exactly the district is doing to help students deal with the trauma of intensified violence. So, people may ask, how is this an education issue? It's affected on a number of fronts. The school day is affected. Learning lessons are affected. Either the school will resume with classes or it will stop altogether and make sure students are okay. Teachers who are already overworked have to go back to class and figure out how to teach a class of students that may have lost a classmate. And then there's an effect on enrollment. This is not a sole factor, but you want to keep as many kids in the seats as possible and make sure that they graduate. So all of this kind of ties into schools being affected by gun violence. So that right there, those three levels there answer that question in making that connection between gun violence and public schools.
So what are you seeing in terms of kids being impacted academically? Are you noticing that kids' grades are going down? Are kids not coming to school? Are kids so distracted with everything going on that they're not getting all they can out of their education?
Mm-hmm. It's a combination of things. The first story, I highlighted the problem that's happening at MLK High School and spoke with the principal, Keisha Wilkins. And there are factors that affect the school day or learning for students. Many times they're not focused. Many times they are agitated and they pick fights with other students. And these are some things that teachers need to notice. And sometimes teachers do not notice because, like I said, their workload is already intense. So you have this program by the district, which is called the STEP Initiative. And this is like a group of counselors who come in and they help students kind of, get through these issues. But again, we have so much that's happening out in the streets, and these kids are coming in with such high level of trauma that, most of the school day, or at least a large portion of the learning school day, is affected. And the priority becomes, okay, well, we need to make sure that this kid is whole mentally. So because of that, the learning has to take a back seat, sadly.
Now, is the district supplying counseling or anything like that for these kids?
That's a good question. They do have a program called the STEP Initiative, and the STEP Initiative is where these counselors. They have counselors designated for schools in hard hit areas, and these counselors, their aim is to sit down with these kids who are affected, who are traumatized by these events, and make sure that they are okay, that they can get through the school day. So there is help out there from the district, and that's something that I would like to touch on. I guess in my next feature story is take a look at the resources. What kind of resources does the district need to make sure that these counselors have everything that they need to make sure that these students are okay?
Okay, I'd like to bring on Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPN.
Thank you, Denise. And Johan, thank you so much for being with us. I was struck by a couple of things in the article you wrote about Khalif. It's heartbreaking, not just for what happened to him, but this stat alone. Gun violence is currently the leading cause of death for children over the age of 15 in Philadelphia. I'm going to say that again. Gun violence is currently the leading cause of death for children over the age of 15 in Philadelphia. We've heard things like that before, but it was something about that fact in an article talking about a kid who's about 15 years old. What is there anything that the school district can be doing differently? And I'm not putting this on them because their job is to educate, and they do so much more than that. But what are some of those conversations right now that are happening about, well, how do we deal with this? How do we make this less common?
Well, there is a specific office that deals with trauma, and I've spoken to 3 officials in that office with the district. They are dealing with something that is historic. I've lived in Philadelphia for 23 years now, and I don't recall the numbers being this high. So they don't know they don't know what is sparking the beefs. They think, and also police officials also kind of looking at social media and how social media plays into all of this. So like you said, you really can't blame the school district because they are charged with educating the kids. But they have this added responsibility of keeping the kids safe. And then they also have the added worry of, are the kids going to be safe coming and leaving school? There was an incident earlier this year outside of Bartram High School. There was a student by the name of Christopher Braxton who was shot and killed right outside the school's doorsteps around 3:30, which is crazy. So they don't know why the kid was shot. But, like I said, you just have this added worry about keeping students safe before and after school hours.
When you profiled Khalif, one of the things that came out that was mentioned about him repeatedly is what an extrovert he was in a good way. He was very into music and fashion, and a lot of his friends looked up to him. And what sort of happens there is there's a death in his family, a friend of his is killed, and you can start to see a little bit why these things perpetuate, because it changes your entire worldview when things like that happen. So I'm going to ask you the toughest question that we can ask anybody. What steps can the city take, school district, city, everybody, to help break this cycle? What is it that keeps causing these things to happen?
I think first and foremost, make students' safety a priority, and not to say that it has not been a priority, but it needs to be more of a priority now. I did a feature piece a couple of months ago breaking down the ESSER money, and that's the federal money that the district is getting from the White House. I believe it's like $1.1 billion. But I don't recall a large sum of that that's being dedicated for keeping students safe. We need money. We need more resources, not just from the White House, but we need money and more resources from Harrisburg. And there needs to be a cohesive team unity effort between the district, the school district, and the community in which these schools sit in. Of course, we have these pathways, these safe pathways, and then there was an initiative to pay for these video cameras for schools who are like in these high-prone areas. But let's say that we get like more of these churches, like church leaders involved, barbershops, everybody who's on that same block where the school sits, let's get them involved. So it needs to be like an all hands on. In my reporting, it just doesn't feel like it's hands on. It feels like people are like just pointing the finger and just pointing the blame. So instead of doing that, let's have like an all hands on, like a more team effort.
Well, to that point, there was a gun violence survey from 9 high schools, 1,300 students. And the survey said that 95% of the students said they couldn't name a neighborhood organization where they could go to talk about the impact of gun violence. And that probably means a neighborhood organization where they could go to do anything, right? I mean, this is, to your point exactly, that is one of the biggest problems we have here, despite the fact there is a lot of good work happening in different places, but it's just not getting to everybody who needs it right now. That wasn't a question. That was just a statement on your excellent reporting.
No, that's an excellent point. And I don't mean to call out any organizations, but I'm pretty sure, Denise can, she can attest to this, that, there was a time, not just in Philadelphia, but across the country, in which you had community organizations or civil rights groups who were at the forefront if anything were to happen in their community. And I haven't seen any of these organizations. So what the students are saying are spot on.
Yeah. I'd like to turn it over to Denise Clay Murray for the last word here.
And that's important to note, because, there are some things that we as a community could be doing that don't even cost us any money. Is that something you're looking at going into when it comes to this in the future? Like, what can community organizations do? And for that matter, why aren't they doing it? Because it's not like the city isn't giving people money to do this kind of thing related to gun violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a program. Kevin Bethel, who is, I guess he's like the commissioner for school safety, and they have been pushing this Pathways program, in which they're looking for volunteers. But they've been screaming and they've been calling for volunteers for years. I mean, this is not a new program. This program has been in existence for like a good at least 5 or 7 years. But the community, like you said, Denise, the community at some point needs to step up. The politicians, people at the city council, city hall, they need to step up and make sure that the community is involved. Whether block captains, ward leaders, but
Mhm.
whatever you want. Like I said, take it back to the churches. I don't want to call out any specific churches. I don't want to call it any specific civil rights groups. But from what I've seen, the 23 years that I've lived in Philadelphia, I've seen a more hands-off approach and people just waiting for things to happen. And that's not going to happen by just sitting aside and just being like a Monday morning quarterback. You have to be hands-on with this. This needs to be hands-on, everyone. I'm just going off. Did I answer your question?
No, you did that fine. Thanks a lot, Johan, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me anytime. Thank
Okay.
you.
And thank you, Hall Monitor listeners and viewers, for joining us tonight. We'll be back next week with more of what's going on in your city and what you can do to be a part of it on Hall Monitor. Until then, so long. This is me and Larry. Oh, goodness.